Welcome to The Warning Shot, a new look at foreign policy. Now here's Endy, Zemenides, and Joel Rubin.
Welcome to Warning Shot. I'm Endy Zemenides, the Executive Director of the Hellenic American Leadership Council and a foreign policy junkie, joined by my buddy, my now partner in crime, Joel Rubin, the former Deputy Assistant Secretary of State. And we're here to talk about foreign policy. And let's start with, why do you care? Ukraine, so what? Taiwan, so what? There's something we've learned in the last 20 years, at least, if not before that. But since the turn of the century, we've learned that there is no such thing as over there. September 11th brought the over there to our shores. The economic crisis tied all of us together. When Deutsche Bank was failing or having problems, your bank account felt it. And COVID showed us there are no borders when it comes to pandemic. There are no borders when it comes to climate change. And that is why you need to know, you need to be engaged, and you need to have an opinion. And now I'm going to ask Joel, the main man, the warlord from the left. Why does foreign policy matter to you, Joel?
Warning shot, man. Endy, look, you framed it up really perfectly. Here's the thing. Everything that happens in the world impacts us here at home. And what we do here impacts events around the world. So it matters. It matters to Americans. It matters to us every single day. And like you, I'm a foreign policy junkie. I've worked in political advocacy on foreign policy. I served in the Obama administration as the Deputy Assistant Secretary, working with the Republican House of Representatives for a Democratic president, which was hyper political and crazy. I was a Peace Corps volunteer as well, living and serving overseas, which taught me everything that I thought I didn't know at the time when I went out overseas. And then I realized I really didn't know anything overseas, living in a village, learning from the village about what the world is really like and really about. And so we are going to explore, go deep, hammer away at real issues and talk about them in ways that make sense to our daily lives. And this is a real warning shot for us, and hopefully for everybody that's listening in today, to get a little deeper, a little more political, and a little more exciting about foreign policy. So let's figure out what is going on with Ukraine.
My sense this will happen in the next several days.
The Russians vigorously deny this. They've put out these pictures today, apparently showing their troops withdrawing from the border, although exactly where from and where to remains a mystery. The main claim that could be used as a pretext for an invasion came from President Putin himself a few days ago, when he said that there was evidence of genocide against ethnic Russians by the Ukrainians. Again, no evidence has actually been offered, but the Russian media is talking up the threat with increasing volume.
So Ukraine, and the center of the world, right? All of a sudden, everybody talks about Ukraine. It's more important to America than any issue that we've heard about in foreign policy since Afghanistan. Why? Why is it so important right now?
As President Biden said the other day, this is about something bigger than Russia and Ukraine. It is, and people are hearing this term spheres of influence. And that's why a lot of people are watching this. Watch how China is watching this particular situation. After the Cold War, we said no more camps, right? The Iron Curtain had fallen in Europe.
That's right.
We were welcoming countries into the community of nations as free and democracies: Poland, Lithuania, Estonia, Ukraine. And let's remember this, because not enough people are paying attention to this. We kind of made a deal for them and their freedom. We told them, give up your nukes. Ukraine had a lot of nuclear weapons. Give up your nukes.
Third most on the planet at that time.
Exactly. And they did. But Russia, and, I'll ask you about NATO expansion, but Russia is feeling, especially since Putin has become the leader of that country, has felt hemmed in by NATO expansion, despite the fact, and President Biden laid this out, NATO is not meant to invade Russia, to threaten the Russian people. It is a defensive alliance. Now, we could debate whether it's outlived its usefulness, but it certainly is not an invasion force. And Russia won't accept that because Russia wants its sphere of influence. It wants a control of its near abroad and beyond. It wants warm water ports. That explains later on why they're doing what they're doing in Syria, why they're developing a relationship with Turkey, who has turned in its west, so Russia can break out of the Black Sea and into the Mediterranean. But that's really a much bigger issue than just a couple provinces in Ukraine. And how do you feel NATO expansion plays into this? Is this a real beef?
Well, you hit all the points, right? And NATO is an alliance. It's an alliance for security purposes that grew out of the Cold War. It was created essentially to prevent a Soviet invasion of Europe. And over the past couple of decades, it has had a different mission. It supported us in Afghanistan, directly organizing, sending troops as a result of the attacks on 9/11, where Article 5, which is the mutual defense commitment, all the countries that are members of NATO say an attack on one is an attack on all. So that was invoked, and NATO supported our invasion of Afghanistan to knock out Al-Qaeda. Of course, we can talk forever about the 20 years of Afghanistan, how that mission morphed. But NATO has had a role distinct from the Soviet Union. Now, all of a sudden, it's back. Now, all of a sudden, NATO is about fending off Russia from invading a country that's not a member of NATO, right? Ukraine is not a NATO member. And what's interesting about this moment is that Vladimir Putin is arguing in public, Ukraine should not be a member of NATO. I will put pressure on them to not make them a member of NATO, which paradoxically is making Ukraine want to become a member of NATO because they are now scared of Russia invading and they want that American backup. Well, that's not in the near term, and nobody's really calling for Ukraine to be a member of NATO. And in many ways, it's going to your point, it's a bit of a false argument where Russia is using that potentially as a pretext to try to grow its impact and influence. I think the big problem Russia has with Ukraine is that it's becoming a democracy, that it's becoming a stable democracy on the border of Russia, which is not a democracy. Vladimir Putin is a dictator. He's been running the country for over 2 decades. He doesn't need a Slavic country next to him showing they can move away from one-man rule. That's the biggest strategic threat to Vladimir Putin. And so this is all wrapped up in his argument about NATO, which I just think is a really false argument straight on its face. And so, but how does NATO for you, and how does American military commitment for you, how do we judge it here at home? What are Americans, what are we supposed to think about this idea that suddenly we're going to go to war on behalf of another country? Or are we in this case? I mean, tell me a little bit about how
we've made it clear that we're not going to go to war, right. A shooting war. And it is precisely because Ukraine is not in NATO. It's not covered by the security guarantee, unlike Poland or the Baltic states, right, or Hungary, Romania, Bulgaria. Now, that doesn't mean we're not going to ratchet up the tensions, and there may be an economic war. If the sanctions that the administration was talking about, that Congress seems to be unanimous over, come into effect, that's going to affect us at the pocketbooks. It's going to affect us. We already see it at the gas pump. That's affecting us. It's going to make things like supply chain issues even a bigger problem. But in the long term, if we start giving up spheres of influence, one of the benefits at the end of the Cold War, and as we're talking about what our threats are in the future, like pivoting to Asia, getting out of Middle Eastern wars, right? We're debating getting out of the Middle East, getting out of Afghanistan. And, a lot of that is premise that we don't have to concentrate on war in Europe anymore.
Right.
over our lifetime, and certainly over our parents' lifetime, the most American troops were the consistent presence was in Europe. The fact that we're able to pull back and rely more on allies and not worry about land wars in Europe. This is going to be the first land war in Europe in a long time. Obviously, there was a breakup of Yugoslavia. That was more of a civil war, but an actual invasion land war in Europe, the first time since the end of the Cold War. And that raises a lot of issues in terms of if a place that we have for so long, for decades, assumed can be free, at whole, and at peace is now unstable. Where do we have to invest and where do we have to send our troops, and which ally may go down afterwards?
Yeah, it totally has the potential to tie us down. And, I think for Americans, it's like, well, we shouldn't get tied down. We should just disconnect. What's the big deal? Europe, Russians, Ukrainians, let them have their own war. I feel like channeling a Donald Trump here. Like, it's their issue, not ours. Well, that same logic happened, of course, in the 1920s and 1930s in isolated America. We don't need to worry about what's happening in Europe. It's no big deal. It's their problem. And of course, we saw the results is that it never is just their problem. This conflict is just not over there. When Syria had a civil war and still does to a certain extent, refugees flowed out, destabilizing Europe, destabilizing our politics here. There's an argument now being put forward, or the intelligence community put an assessment out that said, if Russia invades, there could be up to 5 million Ukrainians displaced. Where are they going to go? They're not just going to stay inside the borders of Ukraine. They're going to go out, and it's going to have an impact. And frankly, that's possibly a calculation for Vladimir Putin. Why not destabilize other parts of Europe? And so for our country, for our stability, turning a blind eye to Europe, turning a blind eye to Russia and these actions is not an option. We can't wish it away and think that things will just work themselves out if we don't engage. And that kind of logic is proven wrong time and time again. And so
people are not thinking it through. There is no fortress America. You're right. Even if the refugees don't end up here, your point about refugees, somebody may answer, well, we just won't let them into America. That's fine. But they were going to go elsewhere in Europe. And as we know, the European Union's politics and several European countries, their politics were upended because of the refugee flows.
And I'm going to tell you, man, what happened then is they went hard right-wing xenophobe. And there is absolutely a connection between the extremist politics happening in Europe and our extremism happening here. A rising level of hate, Islamophobia, rising level of anger in our political environment. Donald Trump benefited from that because he stirred it up. He said, these Syrians are coming, these Muslims are coming. We have to dislike them and hate them. And he used that for political power. And so that's the net result, is it creates more instability. It creates more extremism. It creates more hate and intolerance here at home, certainly in Europe as well. And I think the reason that Joe Biden is arguing right now about American engagement diplomatically in this moment is because he understands that democracies are actually at risk, that this instability doesn't just stay unstable. It doesn't. It actually destabilizes the politics of democracies. We saw it here at home. It is happening in other parts of Europe. We see countries going more authoritarian. Hungary, Viktor Orban, Poland has moved more authoritarian. You name it. Why? Because they're getting more xenophobic. And this is a critical moment. And so standing up for democracy, standing up for human rights, opposing unnecessary illegal invasions, that's all part of the same mix of trying to keep a stable, open, democratic culture. And that's what's at stake right now.
They usually send a reporter right to the scene of a large shelling. There is firing across that line pretty constantly. No such movement has been made, none requested. This looks like it's all for show right now. And it is very worrying to people here and to the United States, because if it is for show, what is it doing? In order to do what? And it does feel like Putin is looking to try to stir the pot, looking for a justification to attack.
So, Endy, tanks have rolled in. What now? What's going to happen next?
Well, you know, some people are like, what if the war starts? The war hasn't stopped since 2014. People forget this. People forget that Russia invaded Crimea. Russia invaded eastern Ukraine, the Donbass region. They're creating pretext in Donbass to expand the war. There was shelling of kindergartens. There's arguments who's responsible for it. The U.S. is calling it a false flag operation. The Russian parliament, or the Russian Duma, tabled a resolution to recognize two of the regions that the Russian paramilitaries already occupy as independent countries, right? So the question is the war going to expand? Is the war going to expand beyond where it's being fought for the last decade or so?
But you know, it's shocking, right? That we've had this sort of low boil war, but it's not low boil. More than 10,000 Ukrainians have died in the past 8 years from this war. They're fighting for their freedom. They're fighting at least for their sovereignty and their territorial integrity. And now Vladimir Putin has put, it's estimated, up to over 150,000 troops all along its border, with about 9 entry point locations potentially for an invasion, a full-on invasion, as if that war of killing over 10,000 people and taking Crimea and annexing it is not enough, right? And so you got to ask, like, what do the Russian people think? What's happening in there? You know, what is Putin telling his people who are going to die, who may on day one, if there's a further invasion, have their economy tanked? Like, what are the Russian people thinking about all this? I mean, what are you hearing?
You know, there's reports that Russians are worried about a full-on war because they have relatives in Ukraine. Remember,
that's right.
Ukraine, and this is one of the reasons that there is such high emotion over this. These were two very integrated countries, despite these conflicts and some key cultural differences. If you go back behind me, over this shoulder, there's a book, Clash of Civilizations, where Sam Huntington was talking about torn countries, and he identified Ukraine as one of these torn countries. There's Orthodox and Catholic. There's people who speak Russian and Ukrainian, but Russia is really creating a greater Ukrainian nationalist feeling. And, you know, of course, Russia, like a lot of autocracies, when we're talking about the threat to democracy, let's not be general about it. These countries, like Russia, control all the information that their people are getting. And they're talking about, we're trying to prevent a genocide of the Russians. This is the same language that they use in Crimea. This is the same language other countries that have justified invasions in the past, Turkey and Cyprus in 1974, right? There's always, we're going in to protect somebody else. That's really not what they're doing. They could use the United Nations for that. There is a right to protect. There have been other humanitarian interventions throughout the world, but this is not a humanitarian intervention. This is a political agenda. It's a political agenda, and I'm not sure. Now, I think he's looking for an off-ramp. I think he underestimated. He calculated wrong. He saw a Biden administration whose numbers are going in the wrong direction domestically. He saw the Afghanistan mess. He saw Russians. He saw the debate over the Nord Stream 2 pipeline causing dissension both within the United States in Congress between Democrats and Republicans, and between the United States potentially in Germany. And he thought he could do a quick strike and get some concession.
Yeah,
I don't think. And he saw Merkel leaving the scene, and he rolled the die on some type of quick strike. That didn't happen. The West held, but now we have a different problem. You have a bear in a corner and an angry bear. And what's the off ramp? What do you think the off ramp is?
I think this is the moment where we are looking at Biden restoring the value of the American presidency. We are seeing an American leader demonstrate to the world what it means to actually engage and build partnerships and alliances to stop aggressions. And we are seeing Joe Biden navigate the politics here at home quite adeptly in getting a very strong amount of backing. But I'll tell you, I do worry a little bit. You'd assume that all Americans are on board with the idea that one country should not be illegally invading a democracy for its own direct power and ethnic pride and dictatorial ambitions. That you would think all Americans are opposed to that concept just on its face, but is that really the case?
All of them are promoting war against Russia on behalf of our new and deeply beloved ally, the government of Ukraine. Vladimir Putin is our most dangerous enemy, they scream. We can't let him hurt Ukraine. But in Washington, the theme remains in force. Russia, 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 Russia is bad. Why is it disloyal to side with Russia, but loyal to side with Ukraine? Apparently, Ukraine's eastern border with Russia, unlike, say, our southern border with Mexico, is a sacred boundary created by God that must be protected at all costs, up to and including American lives.
Whoa. Okay, so that's some cold water. Not all Americans are interested in supporting an idea that invasion of another country is a bad thing. What's up with that? Like, seriously, Andy, what is going on here?
I don't think we care enough. I don't think we pay attention enough. I think we're 30-second soundbite culture. Nuance is not something that's making its way into.
No. I'm going to push on that, man.
Yeah,
it's not just nuance. What's underneath it? Like, why is Tucker Carlson basically saying, "Let it alone. Let Russia do whatever they want to do"? What's going on there? What's happening?
Well, when it comes to Tucker specifically, I think he likes authoritarians. Unfortunately, there's a big group of his followers that you see for the first time. I mean, if you were to tell me 10 years ago, if you were to tell us when we were studying the Cold War, that in the Republican Party, there would be positive feeling for a former KGB agent running Russia. I mean, be honest, maybe I would have expected that from Bernie Sanders' wing of the party, of the Democratic Party, but definitely not in the Republican Party. But that's where we are. That's where we are. And that's distressing because there are spin-off concerns, right? We have lived in a world, and especially since the Cold War ended, that we say it's not okay for another country to change borders or to threaten the sovereignty of another country. And now we're looking at with some type of approval at people who exactly want to do that. When people are talking about upending the liberal world order, they're not talking about liberals in America. They're talking about sovereignty. They're talking about core principles of international law. And that's what Russia and actually China want to upend. And there are consequences to us.
And let me tell you something. I like living in a liberal democracy. I like living in a place where I can have my own opinions, where I can vote for my leaders, where I know my tax dollars go to public purposes. I don't want to live in a kleptocracy. I don't want to have somebody tell me that I can't speak my mind in public. And that's what those countries are. And so for an American broadcaster to publicly support a leader who doesn't allow open broadcasting in his own country is the height of irony and hypocrisy. And it has an impact on our politics now as a result. So what we see in the Republican Party in this case are voices essentially saying, we don't need NATO. Donald Trump, we don't need the European Union. Who cares? They don't pay. And why should we go to war for them? And all these false arguments essentially trying to undermine European unity. And there's an argument that's been made, I think, pretty clearly by some folks on the right, which is that, well, this wouldn't have happened under Donald Trump. It didn't happen under Donald Trump. You bet. If it had happened under Donald Trump, he would have turned his back on Europe in a moment. And he would have said to Vladimir Putin, do what you got to do. It's not our problem.
Oh, Trump's going to be weak with Putin because Putin is saying nice things about me. Okay.
And our European allies would have been in a panic. And that would have helped to facilitate further erosion of our democracy here at home. So we are in an existential fight, I believe. And I think that the debate over ideas and the politics in our country, we see tensions between those who want an open democracy and want every voice to count, and those who don't, and those who are liking the idea of one leader for life, one leader to tell us how to live, what to do. That's not where I stand, but I see that all the time. And so I guess politically, on the Hill and elsewhere, what are they hearing? What do you think from like Ukrainian Americans, Russian Americans, others? Are they engaged? What's going on in that to try to bring some clarity to this situation?
So first, I want to address your point about this was going to happen under Donald Trump. It did happen under Donald Trump, and it did happen under Barack Obama. It's been happening since 2014, and we're just finally paying attention because it might be expanded, all right, and because the White House is finally pushing back. But on the Hill, this is where, again, Vladimir Putin bet wrong. He saw the Hill fighting about Nord Stream, right? He saw Democrats who once wanted to sanction Nord Stream 2 during the Trump years saying, all right, we got to keep Germany in the fold and playing along or backing the administration. He saw Republicans saying, I'm going to hold up Ted Cruz, saying, I'm going to hold up every national security appointee over this Nord Stream issue. He thought that this division, the divisions in America, were so deep that we were going to be paralyzed by him. Now, what he did not expect, it was almost like a light switch. He did this, and Congress rallied together.
That's right.
This is left and right. Yes, there are some voices,
but not entirely. Not entirely.
But in terms of leadership, in terms of people who are going to move the legislation, they came together.
But I, you know what? There's a strain out there, and Josh Hawley is arguing the opposite. And there are people who are going to start pushing in these Republican primaries for president, because half these cats are running for president right now, and they're going to start arguing, not our business, not our problem, don't support it. Then Ted Cruz is going to make the argument, well, Biden wasn't tough enough because he didn't kill Nord Stream 2 right away, which, of course, anybody who's worked in diplomacy understands that if you want to build an alliance with a country, you don't undermine them directly ahead of time, which is what the cancellation of Nord Stream 2 at this moment would have done. But the politics are, I think, going to get worse on this. I think we're going to see, regardless of what happens in terms of the fight on the ground or the outcome, we're going to see demagoguing from Republicans against Joe Biden and saying that we should not be part of this NATO back and forth. We should not be engaged. We should not be working with the European allies in any meaningful way. And we're going to see them stir up the pot of the xenophobia to try to win these nominations. I see that.
Appeasement's going to be a popular word again. And something that people should really pay attention to this week is the Munich Security Conference, right? This is going to be, Ukraine is going to be top of the agenda for everybody. I'm really eager to hear Vice President Harris's address. This is going to be a chance to show whether she's a world leader or not. And even more eager to see how our European allies respond. Because the last few Munich security conferences, there weren't good responses. No. There was French President Macron saying NATO was brain dead. I happen to agree with his analysis, even though people are interpreting it the way they did. There was President Trump doubting or openly casting doubt about whether the U.S. would honor its security commitments, its Article 5 security commitments. This is a real chance to say, no, we may not have our act fully together, and we definitely don't, right? Think about this. The UK, which has been pretty strident in the Ukraine situation, they're on the verge of a leadership change. All right. Germany just had a leadership change. We don't know who is going to be really the leader of the European Union. But the point is a signal that we are getting our act together, a signal in the US and in Europe that we're starting to chart our direction forward, our role in the world, and what the Western alliance really looks at. Because over the last 4 years, people were seeing fissures in the West, within the West, and between Western partners. If at the very least we can show some unity in the West, that changes the debate.
And you know what? You're spot on, because what you're pointing to is just over the horizon. Other countries are looking, they're watching, they're seeing what is or is not happening. China is the primary example. They're looking to see, does the US still have it? Can we still organize? Can we still lead? Do we still have alliances? Can we be a force to be reckoned with in Asia? And this matters. So this moment matters. You're right about the vice president's speech. It matters. The work over the last several months to organize our allies, to tell Putin, no, you can't do this on day one. You're right, Endy. He's been invading Ukraine. This upgrading, this extreme invasion that he is proposing to do, the response has been robust, unified, and very powerful. And it's a signal, not just to Russia, but just over the horizon to what's next to China.
China is looking at this, knowing they know that their sense of their power, their absolute power, is more than Russia's. Their relative power is more than Russia's. Their economic leverage is more than Russia's. So if Russia gets away with this, watch what happens in Taiwan. Right? So, or in the South China Sea. And when people, going back to our original, why do you care? Okay, if we give up spheres of influence, everybody who is listening to this, everybody in America is suffering somehow from inflation. And that inflation is in large part because of supply chain problems, shipping delays. If you let China believe that they can have spheres of influence in the South China Sea,
there we go,
through which 80% of world trade goes through, will operate the way they want it to operate. Or, again, we haven't even talked about this, but this has to do with Russia. This is definitely Russia and China. The Arctic, because of global warming, because of the ice melting, has become a new shipping lane that significantly reduces the time of some shipping. And both Russia and China, because of nuclear icebreakers, have an advantage over us. If Russia can say, hey, I decide what's going to happen in Ukraine, in Georgia, in the Caucasus, what's going to stop them from saying, I'm going to decide what's going to happen in the Arctic as the northern sea routes over Europe? And what are you going to do then? And then when it starts affecting American pocketbooks and the American way of life, is it going to be too late for us to do anything?
And that's why we're doing this show. And that's why we're talking about this stuff, because everything that happens around the world affects us here, and everything we do here affects the world. And it's political, it's policy, it's real, it's right now. I'm Joel Rubin, and I am a proud half member of the Warning Shot.
And consider yourself warned, everybody. We're going to be throwing bombs every week.
Thank you, Endy.